What happens to your faith when God does not show up the way you believed He would? Maybe you prayed with everything in you. You fasted. You stood on the Word. You told other people to believe with you. Maybe you were believing God for healing, for your marriage, for a child to come back, for a door to open, for a breakthrough you truly believed was coming. And then it did not happen. At least not the way you believed it would. And now, if you are honest, something feels different. You still go to church, you still say the right things, you still encourage other people, you still believe God is good. But quietly, something in you shifted and you are not sure how to talk about it because it does not feel right to admit out loud that faith has started to feel a little dangerous. Now, this video is for that woman because there is a kind of tired that sleep cannot fix. It is the exhaustion that comes from hoping, praying, waiting, and then having to quietly rebuild your life around an answer that never came. Today, I want to share my story of what happened in my heart after I believed God would heal my mother and she died. That experience did not just break my heart, it shook my faith. Now, if unanswered prayer has ever left you guarded, disappointed, or afraid to hope again, I want you to stay with me because we are going to talk about what disappointment does to faith and how to begin believing again. So in 2009, my mother started feeling uncomfortable in her anatomy. Then her waistline began expanding to the point where she could not button her skirts. Now, when we finally got answers, the doctors were telling us it could be ovarian cancer. She deteriorated very quickly. Her body was retaining fluid. She could barely eat. And at some point, the doctor had essentially given up on her. But we had not. We prayed. We hoped. We stood on scripture. We declared the promises of God over her life. And I genuinely believed that she was going to be healed. So much so that I honestly ignored the signs that she was getting worse. Because in my mind, I had a clear picture of how God was going to come true. And I was holding on to that picture with everything I had. Now, the Sunday she took her final breath was one of the hardest days I have ever witnessed. She was so weak, she could barely walk on her own. You could see every rib in her body. Now, a group of church members came over after church and prayed with her. And later that evening, she was sitting in her favorite chair. I was beside her, trying to comfort her through the pain. But I was exhausted. It had been a long day and I had work the next morning. But something made her signal to me to stay. So I stayed. Then her breathing changed. It became irregular, then shallow. And I sat there not fully understanding what I was watching. The thought of calling an ambulance did not even cross my mind. I did not know what to think. And then she took her final breath. I sat there staring at her in silence. And for a few moments, my mind could not process what had just happened. I could not move. I could not speak because this was not supposed to be the outcome. Ask, believe, and you shall receive. That is what the word said. That is what I had stood on. That is what I had told myself would happen, and it did not. Now, here is the part we do not talk about enough. Sometimes, after unanswered prayer, we do not just grieve what happened. We quietly start changing what we believe. Not out loud or all at once, but slowly, almost without noticing. We stop expecting miracles and call it maturity. We stop believing God can open impossible doors and call it being realistic. We stop acting boldly and call it wisdom. And from the outside, it can't even sound spiritual. God's ways are higher than our ways. It must not have been His will. God is sovereign. And hear me clearly, those things are true. God's ways are higher. He is sovereign. We do not control Him with our prayers. But sometimes, if we are honest, we are not saying those things from a place of surrender. We are saying them because we are trying to protect ourselves. Because the last time we truly believed God for something, it broke our heart. So instead of sitting in the tension, we adjust our theology to match our pain. We build a version of faith that feels safer, a faith that does not expect too much, a faith that does not risk disappointment, a faith that says whatever happens, happens, not because we surrendered to God, but because we are too tired to hope again. And I know that place. After my mother died, something in me shifted. I still believe God was real. I still believe He could heal. But if I'm honest, I stopped believing He would. And that is a very different place to be. Because when you believe God can, but you are no longer sure He will, everything changes. Your praise change. Your expectation change. Your courage changes. You do not act the same way. You do not dream the same way. You do not move the same way. And that is where disappointment becomes dangerous. Proverbs 13:12 says, hope deferred makes the heart sick. Now, from a Hebrew perspective, Proverbs 13:12 is not just talking about feeling disappointed for a day. It is talking about what happens when expectations get stretched out over time. The heart, the inner person, begins to feel sick. Your emotions are affected. Your thinking is affected. Your willingness to hope again is affected. Deferred hope does not just disappoint you, it reshapes the way you see the future. So the question starts coming. Did I misunderstand God? Did I not believe enough? Does prayer even matter? Or does God just do what He wants regardless? And for a while, I was not just grieving my mother. I was grieving the version of faith I thought I had. Now, looking back now, I can see things I could not see clearly when I was in the middle of that situation. And I want to share that with you to give you hope because I think some of you are in the middle of your own version of this right now. Now, I will never call the outcome good. I'm not going to stand here and tell you I'm glad it happened the way it did. Sometimes I look back and cry because I feel my mother did not deserve to die the way she did. And that is just the truth. But here is what I can say. God used that painful season to refine places in me I did not even know needed refinement. James tells us to count it all joy when we fall into different kinds of trials because the testing of our faith produces perseverance. Now I want to start right there because I know how that can come across. You want me to what? Count it all joy does not mean you are happy about the pain. It does not mean you pretend the loss did not happen. It does not mean you plaster on a smile and act like you are fine when you are not. It means you choose to see the trial from a higher perspective. You are not rejoicing because the pain feels good. You are rejoicing because you trust that God can produce something good in you through the pain. Now, James go on to say that perseverance has work to do in us so that we become mature and complete. And then in 1 Peter 1:7, Peter compares tested faith to gold being refined by fire. I want you to sit with that image for a second. Because here is the thing about gold. It is not put in the fire because it is worthless. It is put in the fire because it is valuable. The fire does not create the impurities, it reveals them. And that season did that to me. It revealed things. It exposed areas of my theology that needed to grow. Its surface belief I had been caring about God, about prayer, about faith, belief that had been quietly shaping the way I moved through life without me even fully realizing it. And when the outcome was not what I had prayed for, I had to face a question I was not ready for. Do I only trust God when He does what I believe He should do, the way I expected Him to do it? That is a hard question to sit with. It really is. Because faith is easy to talk about when the testimony ends the way we hope. When the healing comes, or when the door opens, when the thing you believe for actually happens. But what about when it does not? What about when the healing does not come the way you prayed? When the door stays closed? When the promise feels delayed or worse? When the thing you believe God for ends in grief? That is where faith gets tested. Not because God is trying to humiliate you, not because He's trying to prove you are weak or that you did something wrong, but because testing reveals what is really in the heart. It reveals whether your faith is actually rooted in God Himself or in the outcome you attach to Him. It reveals whether you trust His character or whether you only trust Him when His decisions make sense to you. And that was one of the hardest things I had to face about myself, because I had to admit that I was seeing the whole situation through an incredibly narrow lens. I could only see what I wanted. I could only see what I was losing. I could only see the answer I had decided was right. But God sees the whole picture, the beginning and the end. What is happening in the spiritual realm, the battles we cannot see, the things playing out behind the scenes that we may never fully understand on this side. And we get a glimpse of this in Daniel 10. Daniel prayed, but for 3 weeks nothing seemed to happen. From where he was standing, it might have looked like God was silent. Then the angel showed up and told him, your prayer was heard from the very first day. The answer was thanked, but there was resistance in the unseen realm. The delay was never proof that God had ignored him. It was simply more going on than Daniel could see. And honestly, that is one of the biggest things that season taught me. My perspective is limited. My emotions are real, but they are not all knowing. My pain is real, but it does not have the full picture. My disappointment is also real, but it is not qualified to judge God's character. This is where my faith had to be refined. Because somewhere along the way, I think I had started to believe that faith meant certainty. Certainty that God will answer in this specific way. Certainty that if I believe hard enough, pray the right way, and stood on the right scriptures, I could basically guarantee the outcome. But that is not what faith is. And I'm definitely still learning this, you all. But I'm learning that faith is not certainty about the outcome. Faith is confidence in the character of God, even when I do not understand what He allows. Faith is being able to say, God, I know you can, without turning it into God, you must. And it has to look like this. Faith is answering boldly without trying to control God. And that is not easy. And I will not pretend it is, but I believe that it's part of what refined faith actually looks like. So instead of lowering my expectation of God, I had to learn to believe boldly again, just differently. God, I trust your character even when I do not understand your ways. Now, I still do not have all the answers, but I do not want the pain of what happens to steal my ability to hope again. I do not want to call fear wisdom. I do not want to call being risk-averse maturity. I do not want to build my faith on lowered expectations of God. So I'm learning to move forward in faith again, to act boldly, to hope again, to believe that God is faithful to what He has promised, but to leave the how, the when, and the outcome in His hands.